our topic is making the case for investment in volunteerism. And so most of you all are volunteer leaders. And so how do we make the case for our executive directors, our boards, our funders to really invest in our programs? And so Tammy is going to be here to sort of guide us through that. Real quickly on myself, if you haven't joined us before, my name is Gung. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Civic Champs. This has a bunch of backgrounds on in terms of my history, but I think the short version is I grew up in the Midwest. I'm still in the Midwest. I left a little bit, came back. So I'm in Indiana these days. Have a passion for technology, but really wanted to do something in the nonprofit sector, and so landed on Civic Champs to help volunteer managers. I think it's an awesome mission that we have to enable you all to do even more work and bring our communities together, right? Something really beautiful. And so that's a little bit about me. But I'll turn it over to Tammy, and you can I'll sort of stop sharing my screen. But yeah, Tammy's here from as a guest for us today. I met Tammy maybe a year and a half ago, I think. And she's one of the best speakers I've had the pleasure of connecting with. So I'm super excited in terms of her presentation today. Always leaves me feeling inspired, right? And so yeah, Tammy, welcome. And yeah, I'll let you do a quick intro on yourself too.
Sure. Well, thank you. It's awesome to be here to talk about something I really care about, which is volunteerism. And even more so, like making the case for investment in volunteer infrastructure. As Gung said, we met about a year and a half ago. I have been working in the nonprofit sector as a fundraising practitioner, a major gifts expert, now a fundraising trainer and consultant. And I've been doing this work for about 25 years. I split my time between Detroit and Indiana, which I know Gung and I, that's just a coincidence. It's a crazy coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Indiana is where I raised my kids and I grew up, and my grandbabies are here. And I moved to Detroit when I became an empty nester because I wanted to really test my fundraising skills. And that was 2008. And I thought, gosh, where would I go that I could, again, really, it could be a sandbox. And at that time, Detroit had 30% unemployment. Two of the three biggest employers were in bankruptcy, right? So that was General Motors and Chrysler. 1 in 5 homes were in foreclosure. So I just knew if I could fundraise there, I could fundraise anywhere. And I fell in love with Detroit and the amazing community there. So that's a little background on me. But today, you came to learn about making the case for investment in volunteerism. I don't consider myself an expert in the volunteer space, but what I did do while I was in Detroit is I served for 9 years as the Chief Philanthropy Officer for the Children's Center in Detroit, the Children's Center. And so they served about 7,500 children and families each year, mostly in the city of Detroit, Wayne County. And these were kids who had experienced abuse and neglect, or they came from loving homes, but they had a mental health or behavioral health disorder that was only compounded by the fact that they were living in poverty. And so for those 9 years, I oversaw all of the fundraising as well as volunteer management with a team. I developed a team, and we tripled fundraising in the first 3 years, and we doubled it again by the time I left 9 years later. So all that to say, I really understand how to make a case to grow a team, how to make a case to an executive board, to even my CEO at the time, Deborah, who was amazing, to make a case for why should we make an investment in infrastructure, and in this case, volunteer infrastructure. Why should we add staff? Why do we need systems? Why do we need a special database and processes for consistently engaging our volunteers? And what's the benefit to the organization? What is the return on investment? Because we all know that at the end of the day, we need to make a financial case for when we're asking for resource allocation. So that's what we're going to cover today. And I'll just say my bias about volunteers is I think volunteers are incredible, absolutely incredible, and dare I say magical. That's my word of the year. Magical beings, because they give so generously a non-renewable resource, their time, right? And I believe as a fundraiser that time is even more precious and more valuable than money, because I can make more money, but I can't make more time. All I can do is prioritize and reallocate the precious time that we all have, right? So that's my perspective. And so my goal today is to really help bring you some ways, some insights in order to get more support for your volunteer programs and building your infrastructure. All right, so I think when we think about fundraising, when we think about nonprofit organizations, we think about some specific people. Oh, and by the way, here's a quote from a Greek philosopher. He says, "Time is the most valuable thing a man can spend," right? And let's just say a person, a human. But in those times, it was all about men. So there we go. There's his quote. So when we think about philanthropy or nonprofits, we think about Mackenzie Scott and how generous she has been, or we think about Melinda Gates and the $40 billion that she and the Gates Foundation and Bill Gates have given to nonprofits. Or we think about Oprah, right? We love these people. They are kind of like those iconic images that come to mind when we think about nonprofits. But it's always about money. And I don't think that we have enough iconic images that come to mind when we think about volunteerism. In fact, I can say over my 25 years working in nonprofit organizations, if I had $1 for every time I heard someone say, "Oh, it's okay, they're just a volunteer," right? Like we somehow don't hold our volunteers, these incredible, loyal, passionate, generous people, in the same esteem that we hold financial donors, right? And I'm just saying, and I'm not saying one is that financial donors are better or volunteers are better. I'm saying, and we need both kinds of people. We need all kinds of people from our community. So I wanted to just illuminate a few really famous volunteers. Did you know that Benjamin Franklin, in addition to creating the bifocals and being a founding father, that he created the very first volunteer fire department in 1736? And he had that quote. What was the quote? It was about time, like essentially prevention is like, oh, now I can't remember the quote. But he was all about prevention. And I think it was "a stitch in time saves 9." That was it. That's the quote. "A stitch in time saves 9." So that was his motivation for creating a volunteer fire department. He's like, let's do fire education. Let's be preventative about fires. And when they occur, let's be prepared to respond and to save lives. Agatha Christie. And I don't know about you, when I was a kid, I used to read a lot of Agatha Christie mystery books. But little did you know, perhaps, I didn't know, that through World War I, she was a nurse. Her husband was a soldier. He was actually injured in the war, and it inspired her to become a nurse volunteer from 1914 to 1917. And in fact, she continued on as someone who was dispensing medicine in the hospitals until for the following year, until the war actually ended. Dr. Sally Ride, of course, she was the first female and up until at that time, the youngest person to ever go into space. But did you know she was a lifetime Girl Scout volunteer and even a Girl Scout member as a girl and in her youth? And she became a founder of the Girl Scouts Camp CEO, which was a mentoring program that matched professional women to marginalized or girls who were under-resourced. And she also helped develop the Girl Scouts STEM program called Yes, She Can. So again, volunteers are like right there everywhere, and they don't necessarily get the acknowledgement that they deserve. And of course, I saw that we've got, I think it was Laura from Habitat for Humanity with us today. When I think about volunteer leadership and inspiration, inspirational volunteer leaders, I think of Jimmy and Rosalind Carter, right? All those years, starting in 1984 during his presidency, when he and Rosalind helped build that very first home in New York, and it touched their heart in such a way that they, of course, have built hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of homes in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So there are a lot of amazing volunteers that don't necessarily come to mind when we think about nonprofit generosity. But generosity of time is so precious, and we need to acknowledge it and recognize it and celebrate it and resource it. So what we're going to talk about today is really exploring ways that volunteerism really benefits individuals and families, corporate partners, the community, and of course our organizations, right? So much of what we do is volunteer dependent. We're also going to talk about how to make that case for investing in volunteer management infrastructure to really realize the greatest return on investment, right? So how can we use data, national data, benchmark data, and our own data to make a compelling case for making investment and yielding a return on that investment? And then, of course, we'll just kind of wrap up looking at some of the most common pitfalls in volunteer engagement and how we might navigate those and mitigate those. So that's what we're going to cover over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. So first of all, how volunteerism helps everyone. So first of all, it helps individuals and families, right? It helps connect us to one another. And you may have heard there is an epidemic, a isolation and loneliness epidemic here in the US. And in fact, chronic loneliness has the same health impact as smoking 12 cigarettes a day. Boom. Like, how can that be? Well, it's a fact. I read it on the internet. But it really actually is a fact. Chronic loneliness has very serious health repercussions. And so volunteering helps families feel connected, connects us to others. Volunteering is good for our mind and our bodies. It reduces stress and anxiety, even anger. It combats depression. And it increases those feel-good chemicals, you know, the oxytocin, the dopamine, all those brain chemicals that have us feel good and happy and satisfied and purposeful. Volunteering also can advance our careers, whether it's through networking, meeting other people, or building our skills, soft skills, hard skills, right? It helps just develop us and can help us grow in our career, be more of a community leader, and again, make those kinds of connections. And I know for me, it's important for my family and for lots of donors and super supporters, meaning donors plus volunteers who live in both those roles. It's just a way for their family to come together and to do good work and to bond and to grow even closer while they're doing good. So volunteerism helps individuals and it helps families. It also helps corporate partners. So there's lots and lots of data that says that employees who volunteer have greater job satisfaction. They are more loyal to their employer and they have better job performance, right? And they feel connected. They grow stronger within their teams. And that's really important, especially during these hybrid workforce times. I mean, you may have teammates that you would have never even met if it hadn't been for a volunteer project, right? And I mean, I'm really kind of speaking to those corporate folks or your friends and family whom you've helped bring together through volunteerism for your organization. So it's, it strengthens team bonds. Volunteering is really good for corporate partners. It also increases their affinity, their consumer affinity, and their profile in the community. We're going to talk a little bit more about those. Strengthens our community at large, of course, and it helps us. It helps us make more good in the world, whatever your mission is. And trust me, I have lived firsthand through my own fundraising practitioner work, or working inside nonprofits, or working with nonprofits as a trainer and a consultant, that any organization, every organization can benefit from volunteerism. And I say that, again, just as the example of the Children's Center in Detroit, mental health, HIPAA, privacy issues, you can still be thoughtful and strategic about how you engage volunteers, still provide them meaning, and really help move the needle inside your organization while still honoring the people that you serve and not putting them on display, right? Do no harm, respecting dignity. All right, so volunteerism helps everyone, every single one of us, and organizations all through our community. I love this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He says, "Everybody can be great because anybody can serve." You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics in physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. Whew, that actually chokes me up. I love this quote, and this is the heart of volunteerism. All right, so I don't cry, let's move into math. So let's talk about how we calculate the return on investment of volunteer programs. So simple math on the surface, right? We take the monetary value of volunteer hours, and that's the total number of hours that were volunteered. And of course, you need a management system to track that, who volunteered, how many hours, on what projects, etc. And you multiply it by the IRS approved volunteer value rate. So in 2023, that was established at $31.80. That's what it still is today, to my knowledge, to my most recent Google search. And that actually is a 6% increase over 2022. So we take the total value of those hours times the IRS rate, and then we subtract the expenses of your volunteer program. So that includes staff salaries. Now, if you have a staff member that's fully dedicated, 100% of what they do is managing volunteers, it's their salary plus benefits that goes into the expense pot. Now, for a lot of us, it's a portion, it's a slice of the pie, and so we would prorate that. I'm going to share some data with you in a little bit about what it looks like nationally on average in terms of what percentage of a volunteer engagement professional's time is allocated to this expense bucket. Recruiting, it takes an investment to attract and recruit and onboard a volunteer. And no one knows that better, likely, than those of you who are on this call today. So recruitment, training, recognition, right? We have to recognize our volunteers. We have to love them up and thank them. Project supplies, administrative costs, right? Maybe that's overhead. Maybe it's like the square footage of the volunteer center, whatever it is for you. And then, of course, your volunteer management systems. You have to have systems in order to do this well and to give a great volunteer experience, which of course will lead to volunteer retention and potentially volunteer financial giving. So monetary value of volunteer hours minus your expenses equals return on investment. So that's where we start, but that is not the end of the story, right? So we also need to look at how much more revenue, how much more fundraising How much more money do you get because you engage volunteers and they become those amazing ambassadors in companies, in the community, using their circle of influence, whether it's through peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns or just amplifying your amazing work or being, part of a fundraising event. What is the impact of your volunteerism, for example, on corporate sponsorships or corporate grant making? Like what I have seen and what the data shows is that when companies have employee volunteer engagement, their giving to you goes up, right? There is a values exchange. Their teams are bonding, they're getting stronger, and they're helping you do more good work. And they're wanting to amplify their volunteerism and their community support from a financial perspective as well. Of course, if you've done any reading or working, or maybe you have an amazing women's giving circle, you know that women give differently than men, right? So they typically like hands-on engagement as a prerequisite or a precursor to giving financially, because they want to know your organization. They want a relationship with you. And so volunteerism and giving goes hand in hand with women individually, but really very much so with women's giving circles. And there's a lot of wonderful data, free research available to you at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. They've got a wonderful report on women's giving that I would encourage you to go to their website and download if that's interesting to you. And then, of course, we have board members who are giving their time and their thought leadership and their expertise. We have to have a fiduciary and governance entity to be a nonprofit, and that is the board. There's value there. And what is the board giving, right? I mean, I'm hoping you have 100% board giving at whatever gift value is significant to that individual. And then, of course, there's also the thought leadership and financial giving from committee members. So again, the ROI story is not fully told here on volunteer hours minus expenses. There is a ripple effect of volunteerism throughout your fundraising and even in the quality of your the leadership of your organization, from the board and the committees on down. And then of course, we have our volunteer super supporters, those individuals who give time and money. And the data would say that if I'm volunteering, my gifts are larger. My retention is higher. I'm more loyal because I'm woven into the fabric of your organization through my volunteer service. All right, and of course, if I am a super supporter, I'm a volunteer, I am singing your praises, I'm liking your stuff on social media, I'm sharing it, I'm inviting people in for your mission tours, I'm promoting the ticket sales, or I'm being a table captain at those fundraising events, I'm introducing you to my circle of influence. So again, these all are assets that you need to quantify and report and use as data points when you are making a request for investment in your volunteer infrastructure, right? We need to include, like, here's what I'm asking you to invest. Here's what we will do with that investment, how it will move the needle. And here's the projected outcome based on the history of giving, based on what we've already seen happen, or based on national best practices or regional best practices. All right, so another amazing tool you can download for free, and Gung, I know you've referenced this in some of your sessions as well, so good. It is a research report that was created by the University of Maryland School of Public Policy, the Do Good Institute. And the name of the report is The State of Volunteer Engagement, Insights from Nonprofit Leaders and Funders. And so it was published in February of 2023, so it's pretty current. But it also references back some 2019 benchmarks to show you what has changed, pre-pandemic benchmarks to current through 2022. All right, so here's just a few of those snapshots that I think you'll find really interesting and helpful as you're justifying resource investment. So the first thing is, the question was asked, does your organization have a paid staff person whose responsibilities include management of volunteers? 62.7 of the participants in that research study said yes. So I'm just thinking, do you? Do you have a paid staff person? Are they fully dedicated or partially dedicated to volunteerism? Here's another question and the results. What percentage of time on the job does this person devote to volunteer management, right? Because they may have other duties as well. If your organization has more than one such person, please describe the person who is most closely identified with volunteer involvement or is more senior in that role. And obviously this graph kind of depicts what percentage of time those individuals are spending on volunteerism. So I just want you to compare this and contrast it to your organization. So 0 to 30% of the respondents said that their person who's primarily responsible for volunteer management spends about 36.3% of their time doing that. 40 to 70% of the people said for them, their person spends just under 34%. And for 80 to 100% of the people who responded to the survey, they said it's about 30%. They spend about 30% of their time dedicated to volunteer management, right? So if you're an organization who, like, gosh, it's other duties as assigned, and like, what percentage is it for you, and what results are you seeing? How many donor or volunteers are you retaining year over year? How many of your volunteers are also donors, meaning they're those super supporters? Again, I think this benchmark data is fascinating. Here's another question. Does this person have any formal training in volunteer administration, such as coursework, workshops, or attendance at conferences that focus on volunteer engagement? And what you see here is that a great majority, between 31% no formal training and 32.6% say a bit of training but no certification. So where do we at there? Like 63% don't get trained, right? And then only 31% say, well, quite a lot of training but no certification, or certification, like the ultimate 5% have certification from the Council for Certification of Volunteer Administration. So the point is, we don't invest enough in volunteer training, like training the people who manage the volunteers and engage them. Excuse me. So it may be no wonder if you are experiencing a lot of turnover in that position, or low volunteer retention rates. Another question. When people volunteer their time with an organization, several potential benefits could result. And we talked about a lot of those at the top of our time together today. In your opinion, using a scale of 1 through 9, how much does volunteering contribute to each of the following types of benefits? So you can see 76.8% said that volunteering increases the capacity of organizations to deliver programs and services. Awesome. 92.5% of the people surveyed said that volunteering enhances the well-being of people who volunteer and builds their social networks. Awesome for them. And then 80% said that volunteering encourages other forms of civic engagement and social interactions with communities. So these are some of the benefits of engaging in volunteerism. As we talk about building women's giving circles or different groups, maybe you want to invite your monthly donors to do volunteer projects once a month or every other month or once a quarter, whatever you see you have the capacity to do. Look at the benefits that both they will receive as a part of volunteering, but also the benefits that your organization will receive, right? Increased capacity to deliver programs and services. So again, using this data, you can kind of justify and use it to project potential increases if only you could strengthen your program by investing in infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean, as I said on the top of the call, staffing, volunteer management systems, training, investment in recruitment and attracting volunteers, investment in recognizing volunteers. All right, so let's get down to the making of the case. So here's the first thing. I want you to identify what are the most compelling pulse points of your volunteer management program, right? The most important, the most compelling, or whether those be like we are really suffering in volunteer retention, that's a compelling pulse point. Or maybe it's, here's what we see. Volunteers who stay with us for 2 years or more, their giving is 5 times bigger than people who don't volunteer, right? Or people who volunteer for 1 year. Excuse me. I've been talking a little bit too much. So what I want you to do is create a volunteer engagement dashboard. Maybe it's how many volunteers are we engaging against goal? How many volunteers are we engaging compared to this time last year or the year before? Like really looking at, is our volunteer core growing or shrinking? What's the retention rate of your volunteers? What's the correlation between volunteerism and giving, super supporter giving, right? So create a volunteer dashboard, update it, have it be one of those reports that you give to your executive leadership team, to your board. Like what gets measured gets investment, right? What gets measured becomes a priority. What gets measured gets managed. Oh, so sorry. Can't get to that mute button fast enough. All right. So create that dashboard. Report on the value of volunteerism regularly in dollars and cents using the equations that we used earlier in this deck. Also, those more ripple effect impacts, or how it impacts giving, how it impacts loyalty, how it impacts volunteers. Maybe they came in as a part of a food drive, and 2 years later, they're on the development committee or they're on the finance committee. So report on that. And just know 85% of volunteers donate to the nonprofits in which they volunteer. And that is according to the Global Trends in Giving report, 85%. So it bears the question, can you pull data that tells you what percentage of your volunteers also contribute financially to your organization at any gift level? I mean, bonus points, extra stars, if you could kind of identify it by gift value, or better yet, by gift loyalty, like loyal supporters, retention of those super supporters. And are you anywhere close to 85%? And if not, volunteerism and giving may be siloed. Maybe the culture in your organization is they're just a volunteer, when in fact, they care enough to give their most precious asset to you, their time. So what else could you have access to if you really develop that relationship, right? I mean, the world could be your oyster. Women give differently than men, and hands-on service is often a prerequisite to financial giving. And again, I referenced that from the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy report on women's giving. And what I know from firsthand experience, and all of the data backs up, is that many corporations are looking for partnerships that include volunteerism, not just, partnerships where I'm going to sponsor your event in exchange for X number of tickets or X number of, ads on your Facebook page or whatever. They want to partner with you with both their volunteer teams, where they also get value, as well as their financial support. Now, that's not for every company, but if you look at your corporate list, your list of corporate sponsors, what if you took your top 10 or your top 20 and you began a conversation like, I would like to be planful. I'd like for us to explore volunteerism and perhaps grant making from your corporate foundation. Or if you're an entrepreneur with a small business, perhaps you've discovered they have a donor advised fund, or that you've seen that they're philanthropic with other organizations. So a thoughtful partnership conversation, so that we can really build those relationships, grow our super supporter loyal base of donors and volunteers. Okay. So create that community of super supporters. So important. People who are volunteering and giving financially and being those amplifiers in the community, introducing you to others, amplifying your messages, really measure and report their impact. Because if we can use what you have presently, how many super supporters, what's the volunteer hour impact of that, what's the maybe intangible, high-skilled volunteerism that they've done. Like, yeah, maybe they're packing backpacks for back to school, and that's amazing. But maybe they're also coming in with their video company, and they're producing $50,000 worth of in-kind video production for you. What if they're coming in with some of their analysts, and they're analyzing your program, your outcomes, your impact, right? Maybe they're coming in with, oh goodness, maybe they're coming in just with their skilled expertise, and they are donating that expertise on a project basis or an ongoing basis that enables you to have, like, elevate your mission, accelerate your mission, or avoid paying for that service if that's actually mission critical, right? So create that group of super supporters, benchmark what's the value of it today and what could be the value of it over time if we make some investments in our infrastructure. If we can add staff to manage volunteer engagement, if we can add a volunteer management system, like Civic Champs or another great system. You want to have systems so that you can do this well. And we're going to talk about what the volunteer experience or one of the pitfalls can be if we don't do it well. All right, so it really is just math. It's math. You're asking for an investment. You've got to crunch the numbers, make a few assumptions based on either your data and or national data from some of these reports, and project what could be possible if these resource investments are approved. And maybe you won't get them all at once, but let's have a 2-year or a 3-year plan. Like, we're going to invest in systems first, then we're going to add a staff member, or vice versa. Like, you know what you need most. All right, so it's just math. All right, so here are the pitfalls. If we are recruiting and don't have clarity about what we're asking people to do, what is the skill required? What are the work volunteer environment? What are the conditions? What's the time commitment, right? Those pieces of clarity where we're posting those volunteer positions, then inevitably people will show up and there's a mismatch, right? Oh, I didn't know I would be doing this. Or, I'm not really skilled in that. Or, oh my goodness, like, I showed up to help out at homework help. I didn't know we were going to be doing trigonometry, right? Like, can I please just get the English major students who need mentoring and need some tutoring, right? So role clarity in terms of skill, environment, time commitment, time duration. It could be only 2 hours a week, but it's for 9 months, it's for the whole school year. Another pitfall is volunteer burnout. Like, we just weren't clear about the commitment, that it is a 12-month commitment or a 2-year commitment, or, even board leadership. I was just with this amazing animal welfare organization. I won't mention the state that they're located in, but their board term is 9 years. Like, I've never heard of a board term that long. And they were happy. They're so loyal. They're such animal lovers. They're an inspiration. But it'd be kind of good to know, and they're good about it. They are clear about it. But imagine you've recruited a new board member, and then, oh, by the way, at new board member orientation, you say, oh, and by the way, it's a 9-year commitment. What? Right? So again, being clear so that we don't burn out our volunteers. Disorganization. Disorganization is another one of those major pitfalls in volunteer management. So if you have a challenge with volunteer retention and volunteer fulfilling on their commitments, ask yourself the tough question: what is their experience? When they show up to volunteer, are they standing around for, like, it's a 2-hour volunteer and their commitment, and they're standing around for 30 minutes? Like, that feels like a waste of my time, and my time is precious. I want to make a difference with this time. I don't want to stand around. Or maybe you're giving me busy work. Like, I came to mentor students, or I came to, oh goodness, I came to help families with, pet adoption day, or, I came to help with the student job fair, to man a table, to be a matchmaker. And you got me doing busy work. I thought I was coming to do that, and now you have me like filing things. You have me stuffing envelopes. You have me, doing things that feel like busy work, or I'm standing around, or I feel like my time was not well used, like my skills weren't well used. I feel like you're disorganized, and I don't want to be a part of that. It's a waste of my time. Volunteer retention, big problem. A big problem for a lot of people and a lot of organizations. But here's what's interesting. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more on the next slide. The more that we can engage our volunteers with role clarity, that they are doing what they said they were going to do, that they are feeling fulfillment in doing that. They know they're making a difference, and maybe, just maybe, they're even growing their own skill sets or their network of influence as a part of that volunteerism. If we have complete values alignment, and we have alignment on the time commitment that you're asking me for, then I'm way more likely to stay with you. If you are recognizing me, not that I signed up to be a volunteer to be recognized, but a simple thank you, a simple, like, gosh, you really were great. I observed how you were with John, and when he was struggling with that reading, you were really good with him. Didn't make him wrong, lifted him up. I just felt like he left like feeling such pride, right? So recognition, those things combined will lead to volunteer retention. And then, of course, not being sensitive to availability. Like, I'm never going to be able to volunteer on Mondays and Wednesdays. I'm only going to be able to volunteer in the early morning, or I'll volunteer on my way home from my work, which ends around 5 or 5:30, right? So just understanding and respecting availability, and not asking people to do what they said they could not do. Unless there's a big exception. Like, hey, I know Mondays and Wednesdays are kind of off the table for you, but we do have something really special happening on Wednesday, and I wanted to give you right of first refusal, right? So that's honoring. But you've got to have a system. You've got to have infrastructure and a database, like a way to track who's available when. What do they like to do? What do they not want to do, right? So again, when we don't track these things, when we don't engage and meet our volunteers where they are with their preferences and their passion and how they want to make a difference, of course we're not going to be able to retain them. Because imagine that you're in a relationship, which is what you are. You should be in a relationship with your volunteers. But imagine you're in this relationship in life, and they never remember your birthday. They never thank you for the nice thing you did. They don't acknowledge and see you. You don't feel seen and heard. You don't feel valued. Are you going to stay in that relationship for very long? Probably not. Probably not. And neither will our volunteers. Okay. So here our 6 ways to retain more of your volunteers this year and beyond. So first of all, data says that if we provide volunteers with more challenging opportunities, they are going to stay with you longer. They want to grow and develop and be a part of something where they are growing, whether it's in their knowledge base, their skill sets, their circle of influence, or all of the above. Number 2, we need to be flexible and considerate of our volunteers' schedule. Again, having systems where we know, Tammy can only do Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. I'm always going to want to do something in the morning and not so much in the evening. Maybe some of your volunteers are older and they don't like to drive after dark. Again, we just want to be considerate. We want to live in their world and engage them like you would do with your multi-million-dollar donor, with your most precious donor. We spend a lot of time being very sensitive and very aware and very flexible and considerate with our financial supporters. And yet, we kind of often take our volunteers for granted. They're just a volunteer, right? That phrase, it's like nails on chalkboard for me. All right, so be flexible and considerate with their schedule. Communicate in an effective and timely manner. So if you're asking them to prepare something or bring something to this volunteer engagement, let them know in advance. You want to be in communication, like, thanks again for volunteering last Tuesday. I want to let you know what happened since that time in that classroom you were in, right? Or I want you to know, like, those scholarship applications that you helped us review and put into the categories for the committee to organize them for the committee's review. Those announcements went out last week, and I just want to tell you the story of one of the scholarship awardees. I know you would love her, and I want to tell you this story, right? So again, communication in advance of the volunteer engagement, during the volunteer engagement, after the volunteer engagement. Good communication in a timely manner. We want to invite volunteers to commit more of their precious time. Now, when I first read this research, I was a little shocked. No, I want to be considerate. They only have this much time. They told me that. But here's the data. The data says that if someone volunteers 40 hours or more a year, they are more than twice as likely to stay with you as a volunteer than if they were volunteering 1 to 14 hours. So the more I volunteer in any given year, the higher percentage chance that I'm going to stay with you for the long haul. And when I pause, I get over my initial what? It makes perfect sense. It makes sense because the more time I spend, the more invested I am, the more purpose I feel, the more passion I have for your cause and the people you serve and the work that you do. I'm more invested with my time. And so, of course, I'm going to continue investing, right? So again, invite volunteers to commit more of their precious time in really clear, specific ways. And then provide, of course, volunteers with valuable skills, right? They want to grow. They want to learn as a part of their volunteerism. And that's something that we can create. We can help enable that by putting them in the right volunteer position or in the right volunteer group. All right. So those are my 6 ways to retain more volunteers. And quite frankly, I didn't make those up. I did the research and I read, and this is what the summation of the reading that I did. And then, of course, the 6th way to cultivate and retain more volunteers is to cultivate authentic relationships with them, right? They're not like volunteer number 703. And I know none of you do that, but they actually do feel known. They feel seen and heard and understood and valued and truly appreciated. They feel like they are part of the team, and they are. And to do that, we have to have real, authentic relationships. I know that makes perfect logic. It makes common sense. But as you know, It's not always common practice. And that's not because we're bad people. It's not because we don't want authentic relationships with our volunteers. It's simply because we have limited resources, limited time, limited staff. We don't have systems. And that's why I'm saying we need to make a case for investing in volunteerism. And I hope that, as a part of our conversation, we're kind of zeroing in 7 minutes left. I hope that you've gotten some tools and some ideas, maybe some strategies, maybe a little to-do list of how you can dig into your data or lean into your practices, or even survey your existing volunteers. Just say, this is an anonymous survey. We need your feedback, the good and the not so good. We need all of it. Do you ever show up for volunteering and you feel like we're disorganized? What percentage, on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being, oh, so good, do you feel like your volunteerism was effective? That we maximized your gifts and talents, right? And then don't defend, really take that feedback and say, okay, well, how can we use this to make better? Because we want that. We want to do better. We want our volunteers to feel loved. All right, I want to kind of wrap up with this quote from Steve Jobs. He says, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And I say this is volunteers. Volunteers are people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world, and they do. Collectively, we join together to really change the world, to be the change makers, to make a difference for individuals and families and our communities and essentially the world. And heaven knows we need more crazy people wanting to change the world for the better. Okay. All right, Gung, I think we can do some Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if folks have questions, feel that. Well, Crystal had a question, which is, I don't know if you remember where the data point for volunteers sticking for the long haul came from, for that 14 hours versus the 40 hours. But that was one question Crystal had.
Okay.
But yeah, if other folks have questions, yeah, please do put that in the chat for Tammy. Yeah, Tammy, do you remember on that one?
I don't, but I have it printed out in a stack of papers.
All
So
right, well,
I'm going to
yeah.
drop my email address. And Crystal, if you will email me, so I have your address, I will send you a link to where I found that.
Awesome. Yeah, and then yeah, there's Tammy's email for everyone to stay connected with her. Yeah, any other questions from folks? Or I guess maybe one thing I was thinking is, while Tammy, if you don't mind, we'll give folks a moment to put things in chat. And in the meantime, perhaps I'll share just a little bit in terms of some follow-ups and go through that, and then we'll come back to the questions.
Beautiful.
Okay, awesome. Um, Here's Tammy again, as you all know, so a little background. But for those of you that might not have known more about Civic Champs, just real quickly, right? So we love everything that Tammy talks about, and that's really our mission here at Civic Champs, is to increase your recruitment, your retention of volunteers. And I thought I'd just spend maybe 60 seconds here to share a little bit about some of the technology or platform that we use to help with that. And so what you're seeing on the screen here is our mobile app. It really allows people to easily check in and out of opportunities, right? We use geofencing, so you just super quick, so one tap on this check-in button, and then it pops up, where are you? And then you could select your opportunity, and that makes it really easy. And then at the end of the day, we also collect feedback. So Tammy was talking about the importance of really understanding, both good or bad, right? What volunteers are thinking when they're volunteering with you. And so we think this really boosts retention of these volunteers. And of course, from a development standpoint, you want to make sure you know who's happy and maybe they're more likely to give financially too. And then of course, we bring all this back into easy to understand dashboards, with your big metrics at the top, each row here is a volunteer. And so trying to make your jobs easier across the whole volunteer lifecycle. So that's just a little snippet about Civic Champs. In case people are interested, obviously reach out and happy to show more on our end. So here's our contact information as well. So you'll have, again, Tammy's email, but also her website and LinkedIn, and then mine here on the left. And we'll also share out the recording for this webinar, and so everyone will have a copy, along with a copy of some of these slides as well. Actually, Tammy, are you okay with sharing your slides, perhaps, or some version of them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to.
Awesome, awesome. And then last but not least, we do have a small offer. If you do come to our webinars, we have 2 months free if you sign up with us. And then if you like these webinars, we have 2 more coming up back to back next week, so we'll be very busy. But they're very similar in that the first one is 4 ways to supercharge your grants with volunteer metrics. And the second one is finding good fit funders for your volunteer program in under 60 minutes. So both kind of related to grant making in that process with leveraging your volunteers, metrics, right?
So good.
And with that, we'll come back to questions. I'll stop sharing here. I saw one come through. And so let's see here. So Martina asked, tips for a volunteer recruitment event. I'm frantically hosting one this
This
afternoon and next
afternoon.
week and want it to be engaging and informative.
Yeah. Well, my perspective, I mean, absolutely tell some stories, right? Inspire people to want to join with you because what they want to do, if they're coming to that event to learn about opportunities to volunteer, they want to make a difference. So tell some stories and then, really give some examples of how people have volunteered, what they've done, you could volunteer for as little as X number of hours a month or as much as such and such. And maybe just, tell a story of a volunteer too. Gung, what would you add to this afternoon's recruitment event?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. It might be a little late for today, but one little trick I like is when you have folks bring in something and a little item of some sort. It could be a pen of something, but you try to have them tell a story about, and it has to be related to your organization, of course, right? And so, but bring in an item as something where they can share why they're interested or how it connects with them. I think it makes that sort of emotional connection very personal then for them, and they can kind of see why, and it inspires everyone else, right? Because then people hear everyone else's story that's like, oh yeah, and imagine this is a women's shelter, right? What is your connection? Why is that important to you? Or if it's an animal shelter, whatever, right? Food pantry, right? You could bring in a food item. And maybe it's like your favorite item, right? Just one item is fine, right? So that's something I've seen work well.
Yeah, really fun. Good. Yeah, and just have a call to action. Like, what's the next step?
Mm,
What's the next step?
mhm.
Clear, simple, human.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, clarity is
Good
so
luck,
important.
Martina.
So, all right, with that, I think we're a minute over now for today. So, Tammy, thank you so much for coming today. This is always inspirational, and I'm always surprised by how much I learn from your presentations every time, even though I keep hearing them. And so it's like, oh wait, I got another thing. So I kept writing down different notes here. So,
That's
but really
awesome.
appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good rest of the afternoon, everyone else. And thanks for coming. And hopefully we'll see you at another webinar in the future.